Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's beyond doubt that a successful restoration project. No, it's beyond doubt that a successful restoration depends on a thorough survey which is conducted in advance of the actual restoration, but it's not enough to know that. You also have to ensure that you have an integrated, comprehensive survey, which requires, again, interdisciplinary cooperation. So good restoration is to a large extent dependent on the quality of such a survey, on the survey of the current condition and the required techniques to restore it. And sometimes actually the survey requires even more time to be spent at the actual site or in the building than the actual restoration. So therefore, at times, the construction companies even have better expertise as regards to the authenticity of the particular building. And of course, again, the survey is directly influencing also the outcome and the authenticity and restoring of the original state of a building or a site. And you can have all kinds of charts and you can have all kinds of scientific disputes as to which cells should be where, but it's again beyond doubt that the survey involves a lot of people from different backgrounds or different scientific disciplines. And over the past couple of decades, we have accrued a rather significant experience of cooperation, and we are able to now produce quite meaningful surveys before the restoration. Well, then, of course, restoration is a different story, but our architect, in fact, is the sort of the last link in the chain. But if you look into my diagram, there's highlighted in red with capital letters. So it's good that it's highlighted in red. So this pre-restoration survey, and pre is emphasized, so it's prior to any works where the main sort of thrust takes place, and then later on restoration experts are jumping in, but this pre-restoration stage is very important. Again, I mentioned there are experts of different backgrounds being involved, but restoration expert is sort of an equal member of the team of experts that are researching the background of a particular site or a building. Also, architects are heavily involved. We have, for example, the hinges of a window, and architect who has been researching the window and the hinges before the restoration can suggest the best ways and techniques for restoring the particular window and its hinges. But if a restorer gets the window and the hinges without any background information, he will only be like a robot, or will mechanically restore it without knowing actually what is the purpose or what should be the outcome, the result of the restoration project. So therefore it is crucial to give enough or sufficient or comprehensive instructions to the restorer, and I will try to give you some of the case studies to show you the success stories and cases where restoration has failed, or rather the survey has failed. Two notable heritage experts, Anders Caun, a historian, archaeologist, and Gunārs Jansons, architect and a restoration expert. Of course, all of us mostly know Anders Caun, but some of his projects have been co-managed and co-authored by Gunārs Jansons throughout Mr. Cauna's professional life. And this is an example of interdisciplinary cooperation when nobody really knew what that is all about, and there were different disputes or different differences again between the involved experts, but it is not as bad as it may seem. This cooperation does exist, interdisciplinary cooperation does exist. We have a contemporary architect and a contemporary famous popular architect and an architect who has extensive experience and is very respected, and they are cooperating. And each of us has our own expertise, and we might not be aware of the knowledge possessed by the others. And here's an example for you: Māpils Castle, Māpils Manor, but few of you might know that behind it there's a garden, which in the history of the Latvian architecture has a beautiful, wonderful house of late classicism, and it is the greenhouse, and a construction company can do the background survey and research and find that it's a neoclassicism German, but there are vases that are there, and to get more information on those, you have to bring in art historians as well. So it has a greenhouse on one side and the winter garden on the other side as well, and then architects can come up with sketch designs on how to proceed with the restoration, reconstruct basically the authentic appearance of the building, and then comes in the historian who finds archived materials that can fine-tune the sketch design developed by the architect, which brings sort of result closer to the authentic original. A state or condition, a construction company can do the survey, the background research about a church in Vidzeme, can be happy that they have conducted a thorough research. However, they might not know what the art historian knows. Whereas, for example, art historian focus on something else, something different. Turns his attention to small lamp above the altar. You can see small bulbs above the altar. Or focus on the chandelier, which, for example, architect has missed or overlooked. And most probably architect would not be aware of the whole history of those chandeliers, whereas art historian would know that chandelier has now been restored and it's also been installed back to the building. But just wanted to emphasize that we can't know everything, and through cooperation with other experts we can arrive at the best possible outcome or the best possible result. And I'm not trying to criticize here, but one of the best books in architecture nowadays are written by art historians, in fact. Now let's focus on art historians. With few exceptions, and I could count them on one hand, art historians can't draw sketches of buildings. They've not been taught how to do that. They don't understand the structural implications and features. And this is Jacob's Cathedral. And this requires the help or input of the archaeology historian, who can explain, how this architecture developed and how it was built and how it evolved, to basically dissect the building. That is what the architecture historian does. And as a result of that, they can adjust the volumes and ensure better outcomes. This is Jacob's Cathedral and different volumes that had been constructed over time. And also, if you know the history of the building, we have a lot of wonderful sources of information provided by the historians, and we thought that this altar part got its annex around about middle of the 13th century to 1250s, and if an architect comes in and he can research or study the structural features of it, and then chronologists together with the construction company balancing on planks that are at the height of the 10 meters. They reveal a fragment of the wall with all the plants on it that confirm that in fact this part of the building has been built in 1251, and there is a documental or there is a paper trail as well which proves that, and this makes this research or study more wholesome. And, you know, some people, like artists, they have a hobby of drawing historic buildings, and sometimes you are even requested to do so based on research, based on the artistic approaches. And architects are best at drawing those images, but in this case, this is the Cēsis Order Castle. And this is not about the volume, but about the infamous or famous western wing. So basically this is facing from the south-west, and that wing was lost. It was destroyed in an explosion in the mid-20th century, and we wanted to restore this volume, reconstruct this volume, and it was not only about physically reconstructing, but also collecting enough background material, enough historic background information to create a spatial model, spatial drawing to recreate the body of the building and counterforts and all the loads, point loads, and so on and so forth, and that allows us to calculate the floor panels with beams and so on and so forth. And that gives sort of scientific credibility to those drawings, because we have a lot of over-romanticized drawings that are built drawn by artists who are not experts, at least not the way we are. And this is a very complicated project, the Riga Cathedral, and you have to have scientific evidence behind those drawings, so this required an effort of the architect, construction company, an art historian who can draw the sketches, and architects are always happy when they find out that art historians are incapable of doing something. Nevertheless, this was a very serious project, and all the stakeholders, if you will, they were working on on the basis of all the available information. Artists have some artistic liberty. We don't have any liberty. We cannot create anything that isn't there. We have to create a drawing which will then be included in theory textbook or theory books as well later on. So it has to be scientific or clinically precise, if you will, after a thorough scientific research and researching of all the documentation. In some cases, we have exceptional cooperation when there are no other ways to implement a project. For example, the Riga castles, construction company, architect and stonemasons were involved in this, and it was the mid-17th century when the castle was built, for your information, and this corner facing Daugava River, because you have to study the materials. You have to also study the history of restoration. Those of you who don't know, probably, this bow window of the Riga castle, since it was built in the Swedish times, is actually those parts that are in yellow. Probably less than 15% survived. The rest was added during various reconstruction, restoration projects. So you had to research the history, the material. You had to do an on-site study as as well, and you can't do that without stonemasons or stone experts and chemists who give us the chemical structure of those stones. But if you analyze the chemistry of this, if you conduct the chemical analysis, you can see which parts have been added and more or less when, and at the end of the project, the other sort of deliverable or a side benefit is a publication, very professional publication. Historians can also, for example, be good at asking the right questions. Where was the Riga castle? Was it inside the city fortification or not? And if it is a professional historian, they can even interpret or translate it into a 10-page article. But architects will not find this information in archives. As a historian, you need an archaeologist for that, who's been there and seen the actual building. And here you can see the historians' books and the construction company studies and research and archaeological research. And actually, history has played a joke on us. The castle was both inside and outside the city fortification, so history has really tricked us in a way. So basically, the castle was built sort of with the fortification in the middle, as you can see on the left-hand side. So this red line is a result of a century-long research, or rather, these red lines, or setback lines rather, were adjusted after 100 years of research and study, and we were basically working with maps with existing setback lines without really knowing how those evolved. So it takes decades and centuries of research. And the question was, to what extent was the castle demolished in the 1484? And now we can answer with an 80% certainty what was demolished, what was destroyed, what was rebuilt. Here you can see the cross-section of the castle, and you can see the ground levels, or underground levels rather, together with the levels that are above the ground. And it's not only about the major things, about details as well. Historians can also answer the question, when was the gas supplied, or when was the gas connection built for Riga castle? And when you are restoring the interior of the castle, you know precisely when, for example, the walls have been painted, and you know that it has been done after putting those gas pipes into the walls, and that gives you the date, and that gives you a better understanding of what paint has been used, what materials have been used, and this was again from the Riga castle. And in Latvia, archaeologists are quite good experts in wooden architecture, in ancient wooden buildings, starting with Āraiši, Lake Castle, up to the wooden architecture in the old town Riga, and they have done an exceptional job, and they have done the reconstruction themselves and all the drawings. And then there's another case, if you, for example, have the underground brick walls, and this is a unique building, in fact. It's the mid-13th century building underneath the Riga Castle, before the construction of the Riga Castle, part of the Riga built environment, and it's not part of the Stenhus, which has been described by the historian archaeologists on it. It was at least a two-level brick building that has the chimney or a furnace at the ground level, and you have to consult also the stone expert because you have to put it on the display and it needs to be conserved as well.
Here we can see the Horn Bastion, where we also discovered many structures. So archaeologists, they remove the upper soil, but of course the interpreting of what you find is a joint effort by joining efforts between archaeologists, architects, art historians, etc. And this applies to all periods of times, because they are the people who put this puzzle together. Of course, now we are quite privileged to have all the technologies that we have. For example, drones. If we are talking about the lower part of Jacob's Cathedral's tower, we may have some guesses and how it would look from the outside, etc. But as soon as we have drones at our disposal, finally experts are able to have a look close up without having to climb the tower. And here also the drone pictures show in 1758, if I'm not mistaken. And before the use of drones, no one actually saw this, and before that, the cleaning people, they thought, it doesn't matter, this number is something that scientists must know already. So, and I'm not even talking about advanced technologies, it's just a drone. But when it comes to chemical analysis equipment, etc., then of course we may have different examples. For example, Riga castle gates is what we see in these pictures. Here we can see the timeline of how the portal was made throughout years. And the final picture shows how it looks today, which is basically a reproduction or replica. So basically, we take the originals inside to be kept properly. And for the first time, the color choice was made based on scientific findings. Because before that, we tried to, in a way, to take samples, to, in a way, assume what colors were used at that time originally. But here we can see polychromous pictures. Yes, on the left here you can see how several decades ago the reconstruction attempt was made, and on the right you can see science-based reproduction. For example, nobody could ever have guessed that the armor would be yellow or golden color. Here we can see the Dome Cathedral organ prospectus, and here extensive research was done regarding the history of the organ, and one layer by layer we went deeper and deeper into history. But of course, this the entire organ mechanism was installed on a balcony, and also the balcony itself has its own history. Here you can see the pictures where on the left you can see the original balcony, and on the right the reconstructed version. But of course, in order to reconstruct it, to restore it to this authentic state, of course, extensive research had to be done, not just by engineers and architects. Here you can see how analysis was made, and here you can see 10 meters long oak logs that coincide with historical records when a gentleman simply gave them to the church as a gift. Here we have another example, a dome cathedral. In this case, on the northern side, at the end of 19th century, our colleagues tried to do the research, and they found some decorative elements. And basically, based on their knowledge of that time, they found a so-called graffito technique. So basically, they interpreted as graffito. However, nowadays, we look at it at 100 years old original, simply because our colleagues 100 years ago restored it to this state. And this is how it looks after we did the conservation work. On the south side of the cathedral, we also found some remains of some decorative work. And it's hard to tell whether we are talking about 15th century or otherwise. Nevertheless, we try to document it for archiving purposes as much as possible. We compare it with what elements were used in other parts of Europe.
Parasts vienkārši normāls pētnieks un normāls cilvēks līdz tam brīdim paskatītos šo apmetumu pleķi un viss ir okay.
I would say that all we can see is some plastering here, but based on our experience with the Dome Cathedral, we can come up to new theories, namely we found 15th century decorative finishing work. Here you can see how we try to reconstruct, which would allow us to simply reveal our ideas, best guesses, which are still scientifically justified. Of course, much depends on who are the people who are involved in the restoration project. Here we also have a mural which has been damaged during several reconstruction works. However, thanks to the pre-restoration research or surveying of the wall, we were able to actually come to the right conclusions. So as I mentioned in my first slide, the work that you do before you start with the actual restoration is very, very important. And you have to be really careful not to damage any layer that you may come across. So in this case, we were lucky to have a qualified specialist attracted. And here you can see some details of this mural. There is a hand holding some kind of object. So in the further process, we will reveal more and more of this mural. And apart from paintings, here you can see at least 4 layers of plastering. Some of them can be dated quite precisely, but in some cases our guesses may differ by a couple of 100 years. And this is why we have to cooperate between different disciplines. Here, just 3 meters on the right-hand direction from the mural, we can see a tunnel which had been closed down somewhere in the 13th century, according to our guesses. But of course, we want to open this building for public. However, in this case, we have this blockage that has to be preserved, even though we have to ensure also flow of people in this place. And now I will give you a couple of examples where something goes wrong at one point. Just 30 meters from here, you can find this building. I believe it's dated 1811 as stables. And here we can see this replica of window. And actually we also have some drawings from 1930s. But of course, if from the very beginning we were not disguided by these 1930 drawings, we would be in a better position. This is 35 meters away from where we are. This little entrance door. Here we found that not all artifacts that are included in the project to be restored actually are restored by qualified personnel. And all those who are involved in practical work know that we are talking about very many people. And if you give an artifact to a carpenter instead of restoration expert, there is quite a difference. We also attracted dendrochronologists who may point out that, you know, the modern carpenter has done something wrong. And in this particular case, we managed in due time to attract this dendrochronologist who actually helped us to preserve some elements of the door dating back to early 15th century. Probably somewhere in England or otherwise, 15th century is nothing special, but in Latvia, such finds are really unique.
Mēs saņemam skrupulozi restaurātoru, skrupulozi izpētīts portāls.
Here we have the cathedral portal, which has been studied extensively, painted in polychromy. However, if the restoration expert is not also expert in stylistics or otherwise, then of course the results may vary. For example, here you see the discrepancies between the interpretation where the red painted parts were located. Of course, it's not the end of the world. We may correct, especially when it comes to the painting. Of course, it would be only fair to only include details that we are sure about. However, of course, we also sometimes have to improvise or make educated guesses. Yes, here is the previously mentioned example of the cathedral, which we inspected with drones. Here you can see the glazed bricks that were used to build the tower. This is something that we found during the restoration. However, these new findings were not timely communicated to the right people. And if you don't give to the people who are engaged or involved in the restoration, then of course you risk choosing the wrong methods of cleaning these surfaces. So what I am trying to say is, if there is a weak link in your chain, you may lose irreversibly some historical values. Here is another example of a castle where extensive studies were carried out, which is Bauska Castle. And of course, making models are also very important. Here, everything has been done based on archaeological digs and surveys. And we also try to include in these models some original details, and in the other part of the building is now a museum. And then left bottom picture also illustrates how we have preserved different kinds of plastering. In Bauska, actually, we have another interesting site, which is in a way extraordinary, because it was actually made in 1980s. But also here we may be talking about authenticity, not in terms of materials or architecture, but about the authenticity of perception, because at that time people perceived these fairy tale houses like that. They tried to imitate 17th century windows, etc. Which also illustrates that the concept of authenticity also evolves. Here is another example from Bauska,
dekorāciju iespaidu ar autentiskiem, oriģināliem interjera priekšmetiem.
And here some authentic elements have been introduced in the interior. And another church from Bauska,
16. gadsimta pēdējā dekāde, 17. gadsimts pēc tam,
which was built in late 16th century, finalized in early 17th.
Un šeit ir cita spēle.
And here is a different story. Here we actually destroyed 2.5 centuries simply by playing around with our understanding what is authentic and choosing the authenticity of one element instead of the overall authenticity. And basically, this somehow coincides with this 35-year-old project which I mentioned before.
Mēs varētu teikt, tas ir brutāls autentiskums, tā sarkanā maiņa, bet labajā pusē pagājušo gadu realizēts projekts.
Yes, but if we look at the church, also here we can say that this authenticity is somewhat brutal. It's simply masked with the quite scrupulous approach. And it is clear that not technologies, not drones, not chemistry, these things are not going to save us from ourselves. So basically the human factor still plays a crucial role. Here you can see another example of comprehensive surveying, which also leaves very good heritage for the researchers of the future. Here we have medieval wall painting that is basically left for future restorers to work on. However, sometimes our efforts to revive or restore something can only be compared with autopsy, and we can see that we are working with wrecks where most of artifacts are lost. They are exposed to water, and of course not always it is possible to save all of these pieces of heritage, and most what we can do is just take some of these elements and move them to some laboratory or reconstruction shop to be mended. But to conclude, I must say that I'm always happy to see constructive cooperation between different experts. And whenever construction company representatives or engineers who have found something interesting, for example, here is the year engraved in a beam. So we always appreciate your input, and we are happy to cooperate across this